I now call on Shri Eklabya Sharma, Member of the Board, GBP NIHE, and Distinguished Fellow of Ashoka Trust for Ecology and Environment, Bangalore, also former DDG ICI MOD, to kindly make his presentation.
Honorable Chief Guest, trustees of the Mountain Climate Trust, distinguished participants, colleagues. It's really a great honor for me to be presenting the science part of the mountains. I think we have been talking about development, the right approach, how to meet the challenges of disaster, but science is the basis for sustainable development. So I would like to bring some of the facts and figures about the mountains, about the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, which is also shared by India, the Indian Himalayan region. And then I will talk about climate. I'll talk about also the disasters, the impact of water-induced disasters, GLOBs, and then finally come into nature-based solutions. So let me talk about the mountains. See, if you look at the global scenario, about 1 billion people live in the mountains, and then about 50% of the world's population is dependent on the mountains for global goods and services. And if you look at around 25% of the land surface of the entire Earth is actually classified as mountains. And then 25% of the global biodiversity is in the mountains, and 50% of global hotspots, which Professor Bawa was mentioning. There are 36 hotspots, 50% of them are in the mountains. And if you look at the last part, about 20 plant species that provide 80% of food to the humanity, 6 of them have originated from mountains, and very important ones. You can see maize, potato, barley, sorghum. So mountains are very, very important service providers, global goods and services. Now let's come to this region. We talked about Himalaya. This is how the Himalaya is seen from this space. And one of the astronauts, when he came to ICIMOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, where I was working, based in Kathmandu, then he talked, while he was in this space, only one place in the world he can really see from this space with naked eye is Himalaya. Other places they cannot really identify. That means the importance of Himalaya for the planet Earth. It's so important. It's so important in terms of its, not only the size, but also in terms of its values. That is what I'm trying to say. And if you look at the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, somebody talked about, it's also called third pole. Because apart from 2 poles, most of the cryospheric, means frozen water, is in the Himalayan region. And then, of course, it provides food, energy, water, carbon, and culture. We heard about such a beautiful cultural songs. So it really provides that opportunity. So the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, which we saw from this space, is actually shared by 8 countries. The Hindu Kush mountains in the Afghanistan, then comes Pamir, Karakoram, and then you come to Himalaya, Tibetan Plateau, and then go up to Myanmar. And also, from our definition, we are also saying Chittagong Hill tracts of Bangladesh. This is what we are trying to cover. Here, 10 major rivers originate. And somebody was talking about rivers. No, they are originating somewhere else. It's a transboundary situation, and disasters are also transboundary. For instance, from Kailas, which is in the center part of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, 3 major rivers originate. Indus, Brahmaputra, Satluj, and also a part of Gandaki, which, Kali Gandaki, which is also meeting the Ganges. So you can imagine it is originating there and traveling 1,000 kilometers, 1,500 kilometers, and then coming to the South Asia. So this is a very important lifeline in terms of what we have in resource as a river. Then 8 countries share it. 240 million people live in mountains. about 1.9 billion people are in the basins. You can see the lighter blue part, basins. And the food that is produced in these basins cater to 3 to 4 billion people. That means half of humanity. So you can imagine, in such a small area, we are actually catering to half of humanity. Very much. And this particular slide shows you the concentration of people. You can see in the river basins, whether it is Indus or Ganga or Brahmaputra or Yellow Yangtze River, you see lot of people. The red part is the people. So huge number of people. And what happens in the mountains, disasters, then there is a high risk and vulnerability to the people living in these river basins. One of the biggest asset for the Himalayan region is also the people who live there. They have traditions, culture, lots of traditional knowledge system, knowledge they carry. And nearly 1,000 living languages are in the Himalayan region. That means it has a huge contribution. Culture has contribution to its environment, people, livelihood, sustainable development. Unfortunately, around 70% of them are threatened. They are going to vanish very soon. That means the knowledge is also likely to vanish. So what happens in the mountains was mentioned earlier by General Hasnain. Sikkim, I come from Darjeeling, Sikkim area. I'm born there, I'm a mountain man. Huh? And like Professor Baba, he went to that place. So like that, what happened in Sikkim, what happened in Kedarnath makes a lot of difference for lives in the downstream. So lot of impact of mountains in the downstream. So we need to really develop, manage, and sustain the mountains in terms of, yes, please. So now let me come to the Indian Himalayan region, just to give a context where we are sitting. So here, if you see the Indian Himalayan region, we also call it a water tower of Asia. And if you look at this 9 states, 2 union territories, you know, 2 of them, Ladakh and Jammu and Kashmir, and other 9 states, and then 2 states with hills in North Bengal and Assam actually make the Indian Himalayan region. And very importantly, what we need to see is that out of 36 global hotspots, the Hindu Kush Himalayan region has 4, and the Indian Himalayan region has 2 of them. One is Himalaya, the other is Indo-Burman in northeastern region. So it is a house of rich biodiversity. Next one, please. Now, what are the major issues of sustainability? If we want to really keep our mountains healthy, place to give these services which I mentioned, so there are some questions. And the question is poverty. If you look at this slide, and see China, Bhutan, India, Nepal, some of the countries are fully mountainous, like Bhutan, or to some extent Nepal. But if you look at India, and if you look at Myanmar, you can see mountain people are much more poorer. So when we say poor, it is not only poor by money. It is called multi-dimensional poverty, where energy, where water, all these factors have to be put into health together, so the mountain people are poor. So in terms of sustainability, yes please, in terms of sustainability, then you have a problem. Now let's look into other issues. Food insecurity. 30% of the people living in these 8 countries in the mountains are suffering from food insecurity. So they don't have sufficient food for them to have a healthy life. 50% of them are malnourished. And above all that, people, about 1/5 of the children below 5 years are suffering from stunting. We say we want to be a country of youth, young India, we say. But if our children in mountains, they are stunted, what do we expect? Will they be able to perform the best they can? I think it is not. So we need to also look very much the health of the and nutrition of the children. Then energy poverty. So we say mountains are very rich. 500 gigawatt for hydroelectricity, but still 80% of the people are remaining or dependent on biomass. And now slowly, alternative energies are going. So we need to really concentrate and see. But the model of energy power development in the mountains has to be reviewed. You have seen so much of disasters coming, and it has to be seen what type of development we would like to take in terms of power generation, because this is a cleaner energy in terms of climate change. So in that context, but other implications are there. Then high out migration. In Uttarakhand, many people are coming from here. We have been hearing there are many ghost villages now. People have left and villages have been just remaining. We would like to keep the mountains like that, or we want the mountains to be also having people with a very productive and well-managed ecosystems. Then, of course, biodiversity loss, if you see 70 to 80%, if we compare 1500th century, they have been already gone. So we have to see that is the baseline for us to work. So we have already lost so much, and we need to develop further. So now 80 to 85% of the population are still very heavily dependent on for their livelihoods, for their subsistence from biodiversity. Next slide, please. So these were the issues. Now let us move. So now let's look into some of the very important aspect of biodiversity. Biodiversity actually helps keeping the environment intact. So very much in that context, let's look into this. The Hindu Kush Himalayan region, if we see, there are 4 global hotspots I've already mentioned. In Indian Himalayan region, Himalaya and Indo-Burman are there. And it is still very less science work has been done. If you look at from 1998 to 2008, in 10 years, 351 new species were discovered. That means a lot of work is required to know the natural asset in terms of flora and fauna. So this is what we have observed. Next slide, please. And if we look at how the change is happening globally in terms of managing our biodiversity resources. So what happened? We started in 1930s, charismatic species. Okay, let's conserve tiger, let's conserve elephant. So that was the type of practice, but which is not really a good practice, because we want to integrate people in the ecosystem. People are also part of the ecosystem, so that we have a balance. Then what happened? Habitat management approach came. So it's not just tiger, but it's habitat. Then you are also considering other species which are important, even plants, habitat. And then came buffer zone community approach, where we say protected area, we say Kanchenjunga Biosphere Reserve. So there are areas where we can do ecotourism, where we can also do number of other activities, so the people are also part of the conservation. So conservation, nature conservation and development has to go together with people's contribution. Then we have come to landscape approach, ecosystem approach, but now even more importantly, we are talking about multifunctional landscape. It is not for one purpose. It is socio-ecological landscape. People and ecology have to go together. Next slide, please. So what has happened in many places, we know there are endemic species. When we say endemic, what do we mean by endemic? This plant is, this animal is found only in this area of the world. If we lose these endemic plants or animals from this region, then it's lost from the planet. So that's why for endemic plants, it is more, or animals, it is very important for us to keep the habitat and landscape managed. Next slide, please. So in order to protect them, we need to do work on threatened species. So the research has to look into threatened species. And if we look at the population trend and percentage of species, most worrying part of threatened species, it is decreasing status. So lots of people, populations are actually, species are now more threatened, and we might lose them. Stable one, about 14% increasing, only few species populations are increasing. So we need to really see. Now tiger is increasing in India very much, but we have to see other very valuable ecosystem, very valuable species, and many are unknown. Next slide, please. Now let's look into the climate, because this is also mountain climate. So I talked about mountains, biodiversity, and let me talk about climate and its impact. Very worrying. 2015, I think it was mentioned by General Hasna in Paris, or I think you mentioned, sorry, agreement. I was also there. We contributed for sustainable development, for bringing mountains in the agenda for discussion. And since then, in 2007, it was realized in IPCC, International Global Assessment Panel for Climate Change, this region is data deficit region. So we started working on getting the information. And you know, by engaging 350 scientists over 5 years, in 2019 we came with an assessment for the entire region, and we found that the agreement which we have made in Paris, 1.5 degree, is too hot already for the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. We will be 2.3 degree centigrade. Means if we remain at 1.5 there, it is much hotter for us. And another fact we got is that as we go along the elevation, the temperature is amplified. Means at higher elevation, the rise of temperature is much faster. So that is also worrying. So with the current emission, we are going to really see that some of our area is going to have 5 degree by 2100. So this is the most worrisome situation. Next slide, please. Now let's see this slide. This slide was taken from the Tibet side of the Everest in 1921. Can you press once more? Hello? Can you press? And slowly you see all the glaciers have vanished. General Hasnain, what you were saying, this is the glacial lake. And the glacial lake outburst in Sikkim or even in Kedarnath. So those were either through landslide or through big boulders of ice. If they go, then it causes that type of damage. And all the infrastructure downstreams are also in great threat and risk. So in that context, what climate change, so we have not actually contributed, as was mentioned very much by you. India is not contributing, but by others' action we are facing. Himalaya is facing so much because the temperature rise is very fast. Next slide, please. So with the 1.5 degree, we will lose 1/3 of the glaciers by 2100. But with the current emission, we will lose 2/3 of the glacier. That means if we have 7,000 glacial lakes earlier, we are going to have 20,000. I have actually seen many of these glacial lakes by my eyes while flying through, because I have been flying all over those regions. So this is really worrying. And apart from that, time is not there, but I can say that, see, once they are melted, for some time there will be increase of water discharge, but later on water scarcity is going to be a big issue. Next slide, please. So water is going to be a big issue in terms of scarcity, but also in terms of water-induced disasters, which might happen more frequently. I'll come to that slide later on. Next slide, please. So what is already happening? We are losing the glaciers. You can see this is Ladakh. So habitations are now restricted to only where there are water. So water is a big factor for people who have to live in mountains. So we need to manage water very much. Next slide, please. And this is very important. I talked about 3 rivers, Ganges, Indus, Brahmaputra, one from very small place, Kailas, Mansarovar. 3 rivers originate. One of the tributary also originates from Ganga. Now you can see water. So the blue part is irrigation from snow melt or ice melt. So use in Indus is dependent on snow-fed or glacier-fed. But whereas mountains and groundwater is less. But when you come to Ganga, it is very less. From as far as irrigation is concerned, it is more precipitation absorbed by mountains, forests that feeds into our underground water. And then Brahmaputra is also similar situation. Next slide, please. And if you look at this slide, 15% of climate change, the rice yield. See, the dark one is already we have crossed. with the time there. By 2070, by 2080, we are going to lose so much of food security. You can imagine by just by temperature rise. Next slide, please. So it is going to impact, climate change is going to impact also in the food security of the people by reducing the production very much. Now coming to disaster, very much. These big circles are the disasters where you get frequently and the big disasters. But if you look at the slide at that side, that is 1980, 1990, 1990, 2000, 2000, 2010. If you look at those, significantly number of people who are killed, number of disasters have increased, and you can see how much of the asset, both natural and the infrastructures are destroyed. It is increasing and increasing and increasing. Why? The activity. Our efforts are not enough. One is because of population, but also our planning, infrastructure planning in the mountains, in higher areas are not as it has to be. So this was a Kedarnath slide. I wanted to show this. This was a video. It's not coming. So there you can see what happened in Kedarnath, and you could see actually down very much in the plains the impact of that. Next slide, please. Now let's look into some of the nature-based solutions and how resilience can be built. So there are many opportunities, not the grim situation only, but there are good opportunities in the mountains. And see, actually mountain agricultural diversity is very rich. I think many of you are now looking into buckwheat and millets and all those. So they were the actually agricultural wealth of the mountains, and it is being revived. Now we are getting premium price. So there is an opportunity for us to get. So you can see from the east to west, we have enormous richness of niche products. Whether it is go to the west, you have so much of dry fruits. And go to the east, you have Yarsa Gumba, which is Himalayan green gold, we call it. $80,000 for 1 kg. You can imagine Yarsa Gumba, it's a cordyceps. So we have a huge possibilities in the mountains. So this is Yarsa Gumba, so Himalayan gold. So we developed a guideline for Bhutan. They practiced. Earlier, Tibetans were coming, collecting it and taking it, and they were making lots of money because it was banned in Bhutan. Through our studies, we convinced government of Bhutan, and with sustainable harvesting, this thing, it was introduced. Now you can buy Yarsa Gumba yourself directly and use, and also tea. So you can imagine, through a sustainable harvesting, we can suddenly, next slide please, we can suddenly make a difference. So now I was told that some of the people are coming from high mountain. So I put 2 slides. Yak are very specific for the Himalayan region. Nowhere in the world you have yak. You have llamas, you have reindeers in Arctic, but yaks are only in the Himalayan region. And yak's genetic material is really becoming squeezed, and now there is so much of inbreeding, the vitality is going down. For that, we developed a program between Sikkim, Bhutan, and Nepal to have a yak gene exchange to revive yak. So this is one thing, I'm just giving you an example. But that can happen if cross-section of policymakers, government's political will, and the local communities all have to work together. Next slide, please. So here you can see one of the way to really bring everybody together was the festival, annual Yak Festival, where people from 3 countries who were yak herders, policymakers, all of them, they went together, exchange. And that is how the reality of bringing yak bulls from Bhutan to Sikkim and Nepal was possible. So this is what we can do very much through exchange by learning from countries. And finally, I want to say one thing. See, if we want to really make Himalaya sustainable, so very important, evidence-based information and knowledge. Science is very, very important. But science has to be used, research into use. So we make science and publication and sleep. No, it is not going to help. But science, the research has to also take place in such a way that the policy people have to come thinking together, and designing together. That is very critical, and put it into the policies. And very much, if we look at sustainable solutions, I think at the grassroots level, mobilization of community is important, but from research and policy, good practices have to come onto the ground. So all the players have to integrate and have to work together to have a sustainable solution. Just having one component will not work. All three are very importantly, all three are equal important pillars of sustainable solution. Final slide. So this is story, very small, short story. So you can see in Nepal, this is a very degraded forest. And in 1970s, there was a book written, Himalayan Dilemma, means Himalaya will vanish. This was written by Professor Bruno Messerly, with whom I worked also later on, and also Jack D. Ives, a father of disaster management from US. So these two people wrote about this book, and then people were sensitized in Nepal very much. And then what happened in Nepal was middle hills of Nepal was totally deforested, very badly. This is much better situation, but it was totally. And that impact would have huge impact in downstream countries like Bangladesh, India. So what happened in Nepal? Revolution. Research organizations, they came into how to manage community forestry. Government devolved community powers of managing forests to communities. And they gave the user rights to the local communities, and together they made the plan. And then the community institutions were developed, like community forestry user groups. There are 17,000 community forest user groups in eastern Nepal, middle hills of Nepal. The entire middle hills of Nepal. Can you press once? Such a degraded forest in 20 years. You can see we can green the Himalayas everywhere. Can you go back once more? So everybody coming together, I said researchers, I said policy, I said the practice, community. If we bring all three together and with good effort, such a degraded situation, we can make a very healthy environment and we can create a green earth, finally. So this is what we would like to really see. And this will provide all biodiversity services, helps us to stand against the climate change challenges, livelihoods of the people, very clean water to drink and sustaining water, and very little chance of having huge impact because of the floods. So finally, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very glad that I'm able to talk. Thank you.
Truly overwhelming to learn all that.